5 years ago, my brother and sister convinced my parents I was a thief, a liar, and a disgrace. They sat me down in the living room where I'd opened Christmas presents my whole life and gave me 1 hour to leave. What they didn't know, as I walked out with nothing but a hastily packed bag, was that I was pregnant. I was carrying the twins they would later learn about when they came knocking on the door of the life I built without them, looking for a savior. This story starts on a Sunday in Seattle, one of those deceptively bright spring days where the sun shines, but the air still holds a deep, unforgiving chill. I walked into my parents' house for a family dinner, a phrase that had always felt more like a summons than an invitation. There was no food on the table, just my mother, father, brother Leo, and sister Serena, seated on the couch like a tribunal, their faces grim and rehearsed. "You're late," my father said, his voice flat. He didn't stand up.
"You've been stealing from us," Leo said, getting straight to the point. He slid a bank statement across the coffee table, a withdrawal circled in red. It wasn't my signature. "And she's been sleeping with my fiancé," Serena added, her voice laced with a practiced theatrical sorrow. "He told me everything. The lies were so audacious, so complete, I couldn't even form a defense." I looked at my mother, who stared at her hands, refusing to meet my eyes. "We don't recognize you anymore, Cora," she whispered. "They didn't ask for my side. They didn't want it. They had already reached their verdict. We're removing you from the family trust," my father announced, the words landing like stones. "And we think it's best you leave, tonight." "You have 1 hour," Leo added, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. I stood there, a ghost in my own home, the family photos on the wall suddenly looking like portraits of strangers. My bag, they informed me, was already packed and waiting in the hallway. As I walked out, I saw my father in the garage, tearing pages out of my childhood photo album and tossing them into the recycling bin. He didn't try to hide it. He wanted me to see. I drove until the city lights blurred into a watercolor of grief. I ended up at a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with thin walls and the lingering smell of stale cigarettes. It was there, under the flickering fluorescent light of a cramped bathroom, that I saw the 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Positive. I wasn't just an exile anymore. I was a mother. I stared at my reflection, a stranger with my own face, and made a silent promise to the tiny lives inside me. I will build you a world where you are never erased. That night in the motel, the reality of my situation settled in, heavy and cold. I wasn't just alone. I was responsible for 2 other lives I hadn't even met yet. The father of my children, Liam, was a kind man, a good man, but our relationship was new, fragile. How could I possibly tell him that I was now pregnant, homeless, and disowned? The next day, desperation led me to a pawn shop. I sold the only thing of value I had left, a small, delicate gold bracelet my grandmother had given me. It was the bracelet Serena had always coveted, the one she tried to bully me into giving her for years. The $60 I got for it felt like both a betrayal and a lifeline. It paid for another 2 nights at the motel and a bus ticket to a small town a few hours outside of Seattle, a place where no one knew my name. I found a job waiting tables at a greasy spoon diner, my growing belly hidden under a loose-fitting apron. The work was grueling, the pay minimal, but every dollar was a brick in the foundation of a new life. I rented a tiny room above a laundromat, the constant hum of the machines a lullaby of sorts. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, my hands on my stomach, and fight back the memories of my family's betrayal. I remembered Leo, my older brother, presenting my capstone project in college as his own, receiving praise for the leadership initiative he'd shown. I remembered Serena, at her own wedding, arranging for my microphone to mysteriously cut out right before I was meant to give a toast. It was a pattern, I realized now. Not isolated incidents, but a systematic campaign of erasure. They hadn't just kicked me out. They had been pushing me out piece by piece for years. I finally worked up the courage to call Liam. I told him everything, my voice shaking, expecting him to run. He didn't. Instead, he drove 3 hours the very next day. He stood in the doorway of my cramped little room, his eyes taking in the peeling paint and the single mattress on the floor. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't offer pity. He simply held out his hand. "Let's go home, Cora," he said.
"This is my home now," I whispered, ashamed. "No," he said, his grip firm. "Home is where we decide to build it, together." He had left his own wealthy, overbearing family years ago and understood the unique pain of that kind of exile. He didn't try to fix my problems. He just became my partner in solving them. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. He worked construction during the day and studied for his engineering license at night. I continued to wait tables until the day my water broke. Leo and Alina were born on a rainy Tuesday in October. They were small, perfect, and utterly dependent on us. Holding them, I felt a resolve harden in my heart. It was no longer just about survival. It was about building a legacy of truth for them, a world where their worth would never be up for debate. My parents sent a single sterile card after the birth. It was addressed only to me. We heard the news. "We hope you will be a better mother than you were a daughter." There was no gift, no offer of help, no hint of remorse. I tore it up and threw it away. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had my own family now. The first few years were a blur of diapers, late nights, and scraping by. Liam got his license and started his own small contracting firm. I took online classes, finishing the degree I'd been forced to abandon. The idea for my company, Phoenix Biotech, was born during those late-night study sessions. It was based on the very research Leo had stolen from me in college, but this time I would build it from the ground up, and my name would be on every patent. Getting funding was a brutal, humbling experience. I was a young mother, with no track record, pitching an ambitious idea to rooms full of men who looked right through me.
One investor, after hearing my pitch, had the audacity to say, "Impressive science, but we're not in the business of funding passion projects from single mothers." Liam, who had been watching the virtual pitch from the other room, simply texted me, "His loss, on to the next one." His unwavering belief was the fuel I needed. I refined my pitch, gathered more data, and slowly, painstakingly, I started to win people over. I secured a small seed grant, then another. Phoenix Biotech was no longer just an idea. It was a reality, operating out of a cramped lab space we rented in an industrial park. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, I saw an article online. It was about my sister Serena and her new charitable foundation. The Serena Calloway Foundation for Women in STEM. The article praised her lifelong dedication to empowering female scientists, and there in the description of the foundation's flagship project was a paragraph lifted word for word from my stolen thesis. And the rage was so sudden, so hot, it almost choked me. She hadn't just stolen my work. She was building her entire philanthropic identity on it, using my ideas to launder her reputation and gain social capital. "We have to do something," I said to Liam, my hands shaking. He looked at me, his expression calm. "We will," he said. "But we'll do it on our terms, not with rage, but with receipts." For the next 6 months, we quietly built our case. Liam's legal-savvy uncle helped us navigate the complex world of intellectual property law. We compiled every email, every lab note, every time-stamped draft of my original research. We gathered testimonials from former classmates and a professor who remembered the project. We were building an arsenal of truth. The final piece fell into place unexpectedly. An old family friend, horrified by what she was seeing, sent me a recording from Serena's foundation launch party.
In it, Serena was laughing with a donor, saying, "Oh, the science part is dreadfully boring. My sister was always the nerdy one. I'm just giving her ideas a more palatable face." It was the smoking gun. We were ready. The stage was set at the annual Pacific Northwest Innovators Gala, a high-profile event where Serena was scheduled to receive a Visionary of the Year award. I wasn't on the guest list, but I bought a ticket, my name, Cora Vance, unrecognizable to them. I wore a simple, elegant navy dress, the kind of quiet armor that makes you feel invisible and invincible at the same time. I watched from the back of the ballroom as a slickly produced video played on giant screens, detailing Serena's tireless work. It featured clips of her smiling benevolently at young women in lab coats, her voiceover speaking of passion and dedication. My passion, my dedication. When she took the stage to accept her award, the applause was thunderous. She held the crystal trophy, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I do this for all the young women out there whose voices haven't yet been heard," she said, her voice thick with emotion. That was our cue. My lawyer, posing as a journalist, stood up during the QA session. "Ms. Calloway," she said, her voice cutting through the applause. "A beautiful speech. I have a question about the foundational research for your flagship project. Can you explain the methodology you used in your initial gene splicing trials?" Serena blinked, her smile faltering. "Well, that was some time ago. The specifics are quite technical. Perhaps this will jog your memory," the lawyer continued, and at that moment, the screens behind Serena flickered. The tribute video was replaced by a side-by-side comparison, a page from my original, time-stamped thesis next to the mission statement on her foundation's website. They were identical. A wave of murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Phones were raised, their cameras capturing Serena's face as the color drained from it. Then, the audio file played over the ballroom's sound system. Serena's voice, clear as day, laughing about how her sister was the nerdy one and how she was just giving my ideas a palatable face. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a reputation being immolated in real time. Serena stood frozen for a moment. Then she turned and fled the stage, her crystal award abandoned on the podium. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. I slipped out a side door and walked into the cool Seattle night. Justice wasn't the thunderous applause. It was the deafening silence she left behind. The lawsuit was swift and brutal. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Serena's foundation crumbled. Donors pulled out. The board resigned. The public shaming was relentless. They settled out of court, a settlement that not only restored my intellectual property rights, but also provided a significant financial boost to Phoenix Biotech. My family predictably imploded. My parents, their reputation in tatters, sold their house and moved to a different state, seeking anonymity. Leo, caught in the crossfire of his own lies, lost his job. A few months after the settlement, a letter arrived. It was from my mother. It was short. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family." I read the letter, then folded it neatly and placed it in a box with all the other evidence. The box was labeled "The Past." I didn't need to look at it again. One sunny Saturday, Liam and I were in the backyard of the small house we'd finally been able to buy. The twins, now bright, chatty 5-year-olds, were helping us plant a small vegetable garden. Their laughter was the only sound that mattered. Liam came over and handed me a small, dusty box. "I found this when I was cleaning out the attic. It was sent to my parents' house years ago by your grandmother, and they never gave it to you." I opened it. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was my grandmother's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a single, brilliant sapphire. Tucked beneath it was a faded photograph. It was a picture of me, about 10 years old, standing next to my grandmother. She was looking at me with a pride so fierce, so pure, it took my breath away. On the back, in her elegant looping script, she had written, "For my Cora, the one who sees the truth, don't ever let them make you forget it." Tears streamed down my face, not of sadness, but of a profound, healing release. All those years I thought I had been erased, but one person had seen me. One person had known, and she had left me a map to find my way back to myself. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. I looked at my children, their faces smudged with dirt, their eyes bright with life. I looked at Liam, my partner, my anchor. I looked at the small, beautiful life we had built, not from the ashes of revenge, but on the solid ground of truth. They hadn't destroyed me. They had, in their own cruel way, set me free.